Hi.
Hello. Quick to investigate, slow to help is this subhead in Search of Christian Freedom, page 316. I recall a letter that came to the governing body from a witness whose husband, though baptized, had been inactive for 2 years. The couple went on vacation in a city noted for its gambling casinos, and the husband indulged briefly in some games of chance. Word of this reached the elders, and they summoned him to a hearing. They judged him unrepentant and disfellowshipped him. The wife, in her letter to the governing body, stated that her husband was, quote, not a practicing gambler, unquote. He had gambled on only one other occasion over 2 years previously. Yet, he had been disfellowshipped. She compared this with her own situation, stating that she herself had previously been guilty of an act of marital unfaithfulness. At first, she wrote, she was horrified at what she had done and was determined that she would never do such a thing again. But she did, and now clearly felt the need of help. She confessed her wrong to the elders, was deemed repentant, and was given reproof. The elders told her that they would meet with her each month to aid her in gaining spiritual strength. She wrote that after 6 months had passed, she finally approached one of the elders and reminded him of this. His reply was that they had been so busy, but that they would be spending time with her soon. The readiness to take judicial action toward persons is in strong contrast to the slowness in providing help, and this is demonstrably true on a broad scale in congregation after congregation.
When the Service Department Committee sent this letter to the Service Committee of the governing body, the comment was included that, quote, people are being disfellowshipped for gambling when there is evidence that they are not really greedy persons, end of quote. They added, quote, the question also arose as to why greed has only been used as a disfellowshipping offense when it comes to the matter of gambling. There are others who are far more greedy than an occasional gambler. Yet the question is never raised as to whether they are greedy persons and should be called before a judicial committee. End of quote.
Elders themselves have done some soul-searching due to the quickness of the organization to engage in a form of police action, but its weakness to provide help on any kind of a continuing basis. One former elder and a witness for over 30 years wrote to the Brooklyn headquarters on October 30th, 1988. He expressed his personal sadness that the organization's description of shepherding by congregation elders as a source of loving help and refreshment simply did not fit the facts. Offering one case in point, he states, quote, while serving as an elder in the Warrenton, Virginia congregation, I went with the presiding overseer to investigate an alleged indiscretion reported via telephone from the elders of a neighboring congregation about an elderly, inactive, widowed sister living in yet another congregation's territory, taking care of a comatose old lady for her livelihood. When we arrived, he questioned the sister about her supposed indiscretion. The charge was based purely on conjecture. Her reply was, quote, it has been over 7 years since my husband's death. I've been becoming active and haven't attended meetings for years, and not an elder has ever visited me. Yet recently you heard a rumor that I've done something wrong, and you run down here ready to disfellowship me. I don't understand you brothers. The end of the quote.
Due to the prevalence of such organizational attitude, and after having served for 24 years in various positions of responsibility, the writer of the letter resigned his eldership. In his letter of resignation, he stated that he and his wife would appreciate the Christ-like love, consideration, and support of the congregation. He met with the visiting circuit overseer and the other elders in November 1987 to discuss his resignation of eldership. 9 months later, in a letter to the Brooklyn headquarters, he states, from that meeting until this present date, August 25, 1988, not one of the elders, including W. Parks, the circuit overseer, during his subsequent visit to Warrenton, came to see me to give us any support, spiritual or otherwise. And that was the end of that quote.
Though the elders found no time to render any support or encouragement, after 9 months of being virtually ignored, he then received a phone call from them, citing him for a judicial hearing. Rather than endure the emotional stress of such hearing, he decided to submit a letter of resignation from the organization itself.
Yeah.
Again, Ray has linked some passages from Paul and James to show the contrast again between the priorities of not just the elders, what they're being advised to do, shepherds in the New Testament, but even the congregation. What should their priorities be? And I think these two passages, one from 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and the other one from James, set up a stark contrast between not only Watchtower priorities and New Testament priorities, but are a bit of a reproof for those of us who go to church as well. Namely, it's that we can get messed up in our priorities too, but it's far more violent in the Watchtower where field service is everything. So what does 2 Thessalonians 3:13-15 have to say?
For your part, brothers, do not give up doing right. But if anyone is not obedient to our word through this letter, keep this one marked. Stop associating with him, that he may become ashamed. And yet do not be considering him as an enemy, but continue admonishing him as a brother. Yeah. So there's kindness in the tone, and a desire for bringing the brother back.
The Watchtower has always made this passage about marking a kind of a lesser degree of disfellowship, right? But I've heard lately that it's become more stark. That is, the marked ones are now treated more like disfellowship people. But here it's very plain that they're still brethren, number one, and that they're to be treated respectfully. They're still part of the flock. And that attitude, the attitude of gentleness, as you said before, not only respect for them as brothers that Christ died for, but the attitude of gentleness to take towards them, even in admonishing them. You're doing it for the reason not of embarrassing them, humiliating them, or pushing them further away, but to bring them back, to restore them.
Reconciliation is always the desire, yeah.
Yeah. James 5, well, by the way, before we go to James, admonish the unruly. It's not just that they have a bad attitude, they're actually doing stuff that's, well, you would say spreading their poison if you're a Jehovah's Witness elder. So your view as when you're a witness elder is to prevent them from doing more damage. That's your priority, rather than to restore them personally. So what does James have to say about our pastoral responsibilities?
Therefore, openly confess your sins one to another, and pray for one another, that you may get healed. A righteous man's supplication, when it is at work, has much force. And 19 and 20, my brothers, if anyone among you is misled from the truth, and another turns him back, know that he who turns a sinner back from the error of his way will save his soul from death and cover a multitude of sins.
So we notice right away there's no reference to the elders here.
Yeah.
Who is hearing confession?
It's to one another. I mean, you'd never do that in the witnesses, or you'd be directly reported to the elders. And then they would discuss this with you. It's not the person who you confessed to, confided in. That's the way that's recommended. Because you don't always feel comfortable with, say, the elders, but you may have a Christian friend that you feel close to, that you'd be willing to confide in, and then you can pray for one another. You can
prayer
receive that help.
And counsel, because you're helping restore such a one, it says in that last verse.
So the pastoral work is done by the whole congregation.
Yeah.
Not just the elders.
Well, that again puts some of us who do church to shame, because we do tend to let the leaders do it. We do tend to let the pastors do that kind of stuff. But that's not the admonition of James. And again, the Jewish context, which is everybody in the synagogue. And by the way, when he talks about church here, he actually calls it synagogue, right? In James chapter 2. But when he's talking about the context, in the context of James and his work among the Jewish believers in the first century, everybody in the synagogue, including females, are proactive. Although the synagogues don't allow females to be pastors or elders, teachers, public teachers, they give the women, as well as the men, all a pastoral role in counseling and bringing along the younger.
Their duty is to minister to other women too.
Yeah.
The younger women.
It's not a role given to the pastor, which gets gets a lot of elders in the Watchtower and a lot of pastors in the churches in trouble, because they get the role of counseling women.
Yeah.
That's not the way it was set up in the first century, and certainly not in the synagogue.
Even the last phrase, cover a multitude of sins, you know. As witnesses, you don't want to think of sins being even in there. You know, we're the clean organization. But sins exist. We're all sinners. So if you have a view like that, and you realize we're all in need of counsel and help and correction of things that you might not even see yourself, we need each other.
So the elders should definitely take the lead in this. That's why they qualify to be elders. But everybody has a responsibility for pastoral work, for lifting up, lifting up the weak. Next subhead is a scriptural practice practiced unscripturally. Next time, see you.